Okay.
All right, so here we go. This is Responsive Images Demystified. My name is Megan McDermott. My company is called Woolwich Web Works. The slide deck was made with something called MARP, which is a markdown-based slideshow generator, and I've just started to learn how to use it, but I was getting really annoyed with trying to lay out slides in Google Slides or whatever, and it was just really frustrating. I thought if I could just write the theme in CSS, that would be a lot better. So that's what this does. You just write the content in Markdown, and you can throw in some HTML if you want and theme it in CSS. So it's pretty cool. And I also like that it works like in the browser like a normal web page, and I don't have this extra window with the slides in it, and then you get messed up switching back and forth. So it's pretty fun to learn that. So here's a little bit about me. For those of you who are here at the beginning, I mentioned I live in a small town called Elmira, Ontario. It's about an hour northwest of Toronto. I work for a small company called Woolwich Web Works, and there's basically two contractors of us in our company. So I do a lot of things, design and UX and site building and front-end development and training and accessibility and whatever else needs to be done. I started working with Drupal in 2006, somewhere around the start of Drupal 6, Drupal 5, Drupal 6, somewhere in there. I've actually been doing web development since the 90s, and I realized a couple of years ago it's been over half my life, so that's pretty cool. I still think it's awesome to be able to make websites. So it's yeah, pretty good to be able to do that for 20 years. And I'm the co-organizer of the Waterloo Region Drupal Users Group. So responsive images demystified, and I've always found this topic pretty confusing, so it's been pretty helpful for me to talk about it and really learn it more in depth and understand what's actually happening. Here's a little outline. I'm going to go through a few slides to talk about the different ways that we can configure responsive images, the different use cases. And then we'll jump into some demos, how to configure them in Drupal, and also, I think we'll have time for this, is how to apply different crop settings to different responsive breakpoints, which is another really cool thing that you can do now with Image Widget Crop module. So what are responsive images? They're images that adapt to the viewport, and images can adapt to the viewport in a bunch of different ways. They can change based on size. They can change based on shape. So you can see in the example on the right, there's an image that is a wide landscape on a laptop, but it's a narrow portrait on a phone. Same image, it's got kind of different focal point, but it's sized differently for different devices. And it can also respond based on the layout, which we'll see in a few minutes. And how we configure this, how we set it up, and what the underlying code looks like varies depending on what we're actually changing. There's two main cases. There's a case of resolution switching and art direction. So I'm going to talk about what that means next. I'm missing a slide. Hold on, I'm sorry. See, this is kind of good too, because I can just check my code here, my markdown. Okay, I don't know where my slide went. Here it is. Okay, there we go. This is the right one. So this is a simple resolution switching, and this is your really basic case of responsive images. It's the same image, it's the same size and shape. It scales to fit the device. Same layout, it's always 100% width. So the code for that, this looks like a complicated mess, and we're lucky because Drupal's responsive image module is going to write all this for us, and we don't have to try and do it, which you might have to do if you weren't working with responsive image module. But I'm going to show how this breaks down and what the output looks like, because I think it helps to understand what's actually going on here. We have a bunch of things happening here. So this is a standard image tag. We have an srcset. This is a set of images that the browser is going to choose from when it decides which image to render. And the browsers have kind of complicated voodoo ways of trying to decide what image they're going to use. We're just going to trust it to pick the right one. And here what we would have is different image styles. So we've got, these are core default image styles, 4 different sizes. There's the path to the image, and then, ooh, don't highlight that. Whoa, what just happened? Okay. So the first image is the max 325 by 325, and then there's at the end of the line this 325W that tells how big that image is. So it renders out all of these image files and how wide they are. And so the browser can say, well, when the image is rendering at this width, I'm going to pick this image. I'm going to pick the closest one. So then we have the sizes attribute, and that's a media query actually that tells the browser what size this image is going to be relative to the viewport. And in this case, it's a really simple one. It's 100 VW, 100 vertical width units. Then we have a path to a fallback image, and this is just going to be used if something goes wrong or if the browser doesn't support the srcset for whatever reason, which might be like an older phone or an older version of Internet Explorer or something like that. And then, of course, we have the default alt text at the end. And that's what responsive image module will spit out once we get all of this one configured. So the next example is a more complicated resolution switching. So in this case, we have the same image. It's the same size. It's the same content. It's at different sizes. And in this case, it's a different layout. So on the bigger screens, it's 50% width. On the smaller screen, it's 100% width. But otherwise, the image is the same size and shape. It's scaled the same way and cropped the same way. So here we have some code for that one. And this is almost the same as what we had before, only there's a little bit of a difference in this media query. And this media query is a slightly different example. I should have made this code match the screenshots I had before. So in this case would be something like you had a max 100% width up until 1290 pixels. At a minimum width of 1290, it's going to become fixed width at 1290 pixels. So everything else here is the same. We're providing it a set of images. It's telling them how wide they are. And then at this media query, it's going to fix the image at this size. Otherwise, it's going to be 100% width. So the second major case with responsive images is when you have a different shape and content or different sizes. And in this case, we have the same layout. It might be a different layout, and it kind of doesn't matter. So in the example here, you have the big full width banner image. It's a really common, popular web page design now to have this big full width hero image on the front page, but on the tablet and on the phone, it becomes a portrait shape and it's cropped differently so you can see the focal point works better for this type of a layout. And in this case, we want to do something differently. So we want to make sure that we're getting the portrait orientation image for the smaller devices with the landscape orientation big image for the bigger devices. And this is when the picture tag comes in. So if we look at the code for something like this, it looks even messier. And again, we don't have to write this. We're going to get responsive image module to do it for us. So this again is a little bit of a different case, but what we've got is two source tags that are basically similar to what we had done before with the SRC set. So now I have an SRC set. It's got a media query of minimum width 767 pixels. And this is kind of like a different example when we've got it 50% width above 767 pixels. And then another default example where it's going to show a full width image at smaller screen sizes. And again, we have the default fallback image just in case the browser doesn't understand this for some reason. And now we've got these two source sets. So it's going to say add this media query, minimum width 767, use this source set. Otherwise, use this second one. So a couple of extra notes before I show some demos is that you probably really only need to set this up for images that are going to really be really big on really big screens. If we have this example where we've got kind of a card grid layout, the images are roughly the same size on a big monitor and a small monitor. There's a lot of configuration into doing responsive images that you don't really need to go through if it's not going to make a huge difference. Okay, so the figure and caption will just wrap around this. And was asking where did the figure and caption tags fit in. So that would wrap around that. And when I get to show an example, we'll look in the debugger and we can see where all that wraps around everything. We can also serve high resolution images using multipliers to devices that support them. And I've just decided to leave that out of the discussion here because it makes things a lot more complicated. If you Google around for responsive images, you'll see a lot of discussion about that. And there's other different ways that you can do that if you're writing your own code, but some of it Drupal doesn't output things that way. So we're just gonna simplify things. And if you really want to be able to serve higher resolution images and control exactly how they're delivered to devices that support them, you can. So how does this all fit together in Drupal? We're going to start by using the media module to create media entities and apply the responsive image formatter. We're going to use the breakpoint module to tell Drupal where the breakpoints are for your theme. And that really comes in with the art direction example when you want to specifically make sure it's getting a certain set of image styles at a certain breakpoint that matches the theme and the design and the layout. And then there's responsive image module, which will create all these rules for applying different image styles at different breakpoints. So here's the breakpoints module. And if, I don't know if it was just me or if anyone else was super confused about this file when you first learned Drupal 8 theming. And it was really confusing. Like, why is this here? Is there some way that this is gonna like set your breakpoints in your CSS or something? And I was really confused, but really it's just to make Drupal aware of where your breakpoints are in your theme so modules can do something about it. And you don't really need to put every single breakpoint you use in a theme into this file. You can just put in the ones that a module might need to respond to. And it's probably responsive images. Maybe they've got a mobile menu switcher or something like that that's going to respond based on your layout. Some other, if you look around at some core themes, there's some interesting things going on in there, like Olivero has got some really crazy breakpoints in there. For me, I think it was important just to keep the ones that I know my theme is going to need to respond to, and also to keep the labels really clear so that if it's someone other than me is coming in here, you know, this is the narrow breakpoint, this is the wide breakpoint. That's really all we're going to worry about as far as a module needing to respond to something. So let's go over to a demo. Zoom's little tab here is on top of my tab that I want to get to. Okay, So here's a really basic Drupal 9 test site that I just set up today. It's pretty vanilla Drupal 9. I decided to get the Oliveira theme to play with and see what it looks like. I've created a really simple block type with just an image in it, so we can use that to show how to configure this. And I just put it into this full width region that Oliveira has, which isn't really full width. At some screen sizes, it's got a sidebar on the right and it's got one on the left. But for the purposes of this demo, we're just going to pretend that it's full width. And this is a picture of a bike ride that I was able to go on Sunday because it was really unseasonably warm. So this is where I went on a bike ride last Sunday. So we're going to start by going into the responsive images module settings. I've already got, this is Drupal 9, so media is already set up by default. I didn't have to do anything with that. I did have to enable responsive images module because it wasn't enabled by default. And we're going to start by adding a new responsive image module that's just going to do the first case of resolution switching. So I'm just going to call this a full width image style. So I'm configuring a new responsive image style. I can choose a breakpoint group here. Now, responsive image module is actually useful if you're doing resolution switching. You're not configuring different sets of image styles for different specific breakpoints. You're just going to use the sizes module. We can just use the breakpoint group that comes with responsive image. I can show you the ones that come with Oliveira because it's a bit crazy. So we get all these image styles like one-time grid max, grid medium. I don't know. I guess if you worked on Oliveira, you'd know what these mean. So there's, different min width sizes. Nav medium, so this would be responding to the nav, different grids here. But we're just going to keep it really simple with responsive image, and we're going to select multiple images and use the sizes attribute. So this is going to be, and this sets us all up for us by default. We don't really even have to do anything here. It's going to be 100 viewport width units. That's all we want to do. It's going to be 100% width at all screen sizes. We're just going to check off some of these default image styles, like in the code that we showed earlier. And choose a fallback image style of the smallest one. There, so now I have my full width responsive image style. And I'm going to go back to that block that I created earlier. Custom block library, block types. Here's my banner image that I created. I'm going to go into Manage Display. And now I can just set this to responsive images. I choose my full width. Save. Okay, now I'll go back to the site and take a look at my image. It'll probably look the same. Let's look at the code. Okay, so I'm going to edit this and add some hard returns in here so we can see what's going on. So here we have our image with our srcset. So this is rendering all those image styles that I checked off there. And so we can see the first one, the max 325, and it's got the 325 width there, tells the browser to use that one if it's around 325 pixels, and so on with the different sizes. This one's a 650 one. I'll add some hard returns here. And here's the biggest one. And here's our sizes attribute, which is 100% width always. Here's our default image and the alt text and so on. So if I had configured this with fences or something and put in a figure tag, it would be here. So it's just got the default field name, whatever. So the next thing we're going to do is we're going to look at an example of doing a little bit more of a complex resolution switching. And this is where we actually looked at the code for this, where we're going to make it a maximum size. So here's the browser trying to figure out which size to use. It's a little bit hard to debug these because the debugging tools don't necessarily want to tell you. It's kind of hard to see which one am I using. Oh, that one's 695 by 345. Okay, perfect. That's about the right size that it should be. Or that's where it's rendering. So we're going to look at another image style, and actually the default wide image responsive image style is a useful one for seeing an example of with a little bit more of a complex media query. So we look at the wide one. By default, there's a narrow one and a wide. And so wide now has a media query. And so here in this case, we say if it's at minimum width, 1290, make this 1290 pixels. Otherwise, it's 100% width. And it's going to select multiple images, use the sizes attribute. We're going to check off the same image styles that was there before, and the same fallback. So you know what I'm going to do? Let's just make this one half width so we can see a little bit better what we're doing. Okay. Let's say min width. So at min width, 50%. Why don't we do 50 VW since. So at minimum width, 1,000, we're going to make it 50% width, otherwise make it 100. And we're going to select all our default image styles here. Normally you'd create ones that better suit the size and shape of what you're actually designing with. So let's see what happens to our sample image when we apply the half width image style to it. So now I'm back to manage display on my test block type. I'm going to change that to the half width style. Now what do we get? There, now it's half width. So the sources in here are just telling it to get the right image at 50% width. We have the same SRC source set, but now we have sizes saying at our minimum width of 1,000 pixels, make it 50 vertical width unit, viewport width units. Otherwise, make it 100% width. And if I resize this down below 1,000 pixels, now it's 100% width. And obviously, strange things could happen if your CSS was somehow overriding the width of the image and telling it to be a different size than what you've configured here, but I think that's why this all works in tandem with your breakpoints and your theming. All right. So, any questions so far? I'm going to switch over to a different real site where I actually did some more complicated configuration for this. Then we can actually look at some cropping. I'm used to being interrupted, so go ahead and comment or ask questions if you have any questions.
Yeah, and I apologize at the beginning of your session. I had it set so people couldn't unmute themselves, but I have
Okay.
changed that. So if any of you got
Okay, sure.
frustrated, you can try again now.
Yeah, so how would you get the responsive images in Twig to render them directly? I think there's a way to do that, but it's really hard. And I think I've looked at doing it before, but I don't actually know. All right, so and normally actually if I'm writing something directly in Twig, I might just output the image styles directly or write the tag directly, the code for the picture tag or the source srcset directly. All right, so this is Direct Energy Regulated Services, and this is an energy services provider out in Alberta, Ontario. And their parent company is actually in Texas, so we had a lot of meetings with people in Texas on this project recently. So there are certain things happening with banner images on this site. So if I go to a page that has a banner image, okay, I need to go to production because I don't have the banner images on my local site. Or how about go to yet another dev site? We don't want to muck around on production. I should have thought of this before I started here. Come on. Like platform. Just trying to do a drush ULI, but now platform command wants to update itself. Okay, now we will try something else. Okay, I know the password. Alrighty, here we are. So this site has some peculiarities with images and banner images. So we can see that here we have a 50% width banner image. If you look carefully up here in the right corner, there's a little curve that goes over top of the image. And I, as a developer, I really hate it when designers put stuff on top of images because you know people are going to start complaining about heads being cut off. This is why we have all this cropping set up, so we can be very careful about how the images fit in this space at different screen sizes. Or the designer maybe didn't consider that once you start resizing this, things start happening. We also have this little blue thing, it's called a snippet, that appears over top of the image. So I have to be really careful about how this image is cropped. And the other thing that happens is then when we go down to mobile size, it becomes full width. And that's another case where we want to be careful about where the crop is happening and whose heads are being cut off and things like that. So this is an example of art direction where we have an image that changes its size and shape at different breakpoints. And this is where our breakpoints module is going to come in. Do other people like coffee module? It's really annoying when it's not there. So, all right. So here we have our responsive images set up on this particular site, and we have this banner half width. So here's our responsive images with using the different breakpoints and setting up different sizes within those different breakpoints. So now I've set my breakpoint group to my theme, Direct Energy. And we had our wide and our mobile sizes. And this is the media query that's in the breakpoints file, min width 767. This is where I want it to be half width. So I'm going to select multiple image styles and use the sizes attribute. It's always going to be 50% width, and we could put a media query in here too if you wanted to get even more refined about what you're serving and when. So I have my two image styles for banner half width. And then for the mobile breakpoint, I just had a single image style configured for this one, and it's the banner small, and that's going to be banner full width. So if we go back to that page with the image, we inspect the code for this. So now we see we have picture. Oh, I should have used fences and put a figure around here, but I didn't. So we can see here we have our picture module, and now we have the source tags with the srcsets. And the first one is going to have 2. Let's edit this so we can add some returns and see what's going on. So we have our src set, and it's going to have the 2 image styles that I'd selected for that. Our media query, and the sizes attribute. Okay, so there, I have to scroll to the end here to see our 2 src sets, our 2 image styles. It shows what size this image is roughly. The browser is going to pick the best fit. I should have maybe added one bigger one there just for a higher resolution or something. It's got the media query for this source, which is min width 767. And at min width 767, it's 50 viewport width. And the browser will pick whatever the best sized image is for that. And then the other source is doesn't have a media query attached. This will just be the fallback. And it's just got the one source image there. And finally, our default image. I suppose the default image might also be rendered if you configured your sources wrong and there was a media query that wasn't covered by your source, by your breakpoints. There, and that works. The browser picks the right one, depending on the viewport width. So the next thing I wanted to show, which is really cool, is how we can get the cropping to happen for these images in the browser. And one of the things I've actually had to do before is do things like make a separate field for the mobile images, because the automatic scale and cropping just isn't going to work when you start changing the size and shape of it, or even when you take something down to mobile. Getting the focal point right, you know, clients might just want to be able to refine that more. And as I mentioned, in this case, we want to really be careful that people's heads aren't going to be cut off. You don't want someone to have to go into a graphics program, especially someone who's you know, it's not their job to crop images all day to try and figure out where's the right space and things like that. So in comes Image Widget Crop module. Image Widget Crop, all one word. So Image Widget Crop does, I think this is not the right, it's actually under crop settings, crop types. So Image Widget Crop, the new version, lets you have different crop types. And this is crop types. It sounds like a farming term or something, crop types. I'm also starting to work on some agricultural projects, so it kind of reminds me of something that would come up in there. My kid is whispering in the background and he thinks it's really funny. Both of them are whispering in the background. Okay. All right. So we can add different crop types and then we can apply them at different breakpoints, which is really, really cool. Actually apply them in our image styles. So this is kind of a little bit head spinny, but as you can see, we have the banner crop, which we're going to use for banners at half width, and a banner mobile crop. And then these are put in to the image styles that were put in to the responsive images, if that all makes sense. But it all fits together really beautifully. So now we have our half width crop. It's going to be used in my half width image style. And I can edit this crop setting and we can do all kinds of different configuration for the cropping. So we can set limits, and I think this will be clear once we see a demo of what the cropping actually looks like. You can set an aspect ratio. You can set a limit to the size that they're allowed to crop, so somebody can't crop it too small. A hard limit, so they really can't crop it too small, although I haven't tried this myself, but someone told me that one of these doesn't really work very well. And then when I go back to that image, and I'll use the contextual links as an easy way to get to edit that image. In our cropping, we can see our different crop types. And I think with previous versions of Image Widget Crop, there was only one. But now we have different crops for our banner half width. And this one I can be a little bit flexible in the size and shape. I just want to make sure that I provided training when I trained the content editors, just to make sure there's enough room at the top of this image. And make sure there's enough room where that blue snippet is going to come over. And then I can apply a different cropping for mobile. I can make it more landscape oriented. And this all worked really beautifully. And I'm also thankful to Composer. Actually, this didn't have any extra Composer libraries, I don't think, third-party libraries. It just worked really well. And there's another case where I have these cropping set up for some hero images that I can show in a moment. So in this case, it's actually got the crop setting has, I'm sorry, I'm gonna have to tell a child to, how can I mute myself first? Okay, the other parent has appeared to take care of them and make them go away. All right. So yes, so Charles mentioned that this of course assumes that the original photo has enough headroom and you can't uncrop what's not there. Yes, for sure. And that's something that I don't know if we've all come across cases where the client then starts complaining that people's heads are cut off. There's not enough room for something to appear on top in that space. So it's one thing to like carefully design something with a beautiful photo and you've got some text on top of it. It looks really great. And then the client goes to change the photo and it doesn't work, or I still cringe at some sites I've worked on years ago and I go back and look at them and they've got like background images with text on them in the background. It's like, that doesn't meet contrast requirements. But anyway, so yeah, this is a case where you also need your editors to be somewhat savvy. And I know certain clients, I might not throw them into this because they're not really going to be savvy enough to be able to work this. But we've got some pretty good marketing people on the client side who are going to be able to handle this. At least I hope so in the future. So, yeah, so this hero full width example has got a fixed width setting in the image cropping. So I can't actually scale it other than this wide landscape size. And I believe the mobile one, oh, there it is the same. It's going to be the same shape. And that one actually can potentially go in a slideshow. So that's where a case where you definitely want to make sure that it's going to be the right size. So that's what happens when you apply these different crop types with Image Widget Crop to your image styles, which then go into your responsive images, and everything works really beautifully. And there we go. His head's only a little bit cut off. I didn't mind. So that's actually everything I was going to show you. Is there anything anyone would like to see again or review? Oh, Anne asked, do auto crops always happen from the top? No. Do auto crops always happen? So if you automatically scaled and cropped it, Image Widget Crop, let me see if I can find it. You never know if the module developer has put in the spaces or where exactly. There we go. Ralph got to it before I did. Image Widget Crop. Yeah, so you can manually, and with your image styles, you can set the scale and crop to go from the center or the bottom corner. And it's one of those things where like some images you want it to crop from the top and some images from the bottom. So the manual cropping really gives the content editor fine-tuned control over where exactly the cropping is happening. There's also focal point module, which I haven't actually used myself before, but it can kind of help with some of this, but it doesn't really give you this fine tuning over, making sure there's enough space above heads and things like that.
Are there any other questions for Megan?
My challenge with setting up responsive images has been with setting the sizes value. And it kind of appears that the way that you're supposed to do it is going kind of counter to what we normally think of when we think of responsive design, which is mobile first. You kind of go the other direction almost. Like you start with a larger size and then you end up with most of the time 100 VW as the last value. Which
Let me
presumably be the mobile, like a smaller device.
let me go to this one over here. No. Yes, Ralph mentioned responsive image linter. I've checked that, yes. Yes, if you're not sure or you're trying to make sure that it's output correctly, there's a Ralph has posted a responsive image linter. So let me go into this wide one. So yeah, the last media query, so it's going to pick the first one that applies. And then the last one, you always have something that's going to be a default, so it doesn't have a media query attached. So by default, it's going to be 100 vertical width viewport. I always want to say vertical viewport width units. So the last one in the string of the sizes is going to be the default, which is going to be your mobile first. So you're right, it's kind of the opposite. You're going to set your default, which is probably going to be the mobile, as the last item in the sizes.
Okay, that's helpful. And just looking at this, so we say if the minimum width of the browser is 1290 pixels, the size is 1290.
Yeah.
Now there's no image style that has 1290. There's 1300.
Right.
So will
Yeah.
browsers choose that because it's sort of roughly the right size?
Yeah. Yeah, and this is actually the default that's provided by Drupal, and I don't know why they didn't make it match the image style. And really what you would probably have is one that matches or matches very closely if you configure these custom image styles.
But since that's a min width media query, I would assume you would not want a 1290 pixel image if the minimum width is 1290. You'd probably want something larger. You'd want a larger version of that because
Yeah,
1290 is
so
immediately going to start scaling up at that breakpoint, right? It's sort of confusing.
yeah, well, this one is actually at min width, it's going to be fixed width at 1290. So this is kind of an example where like you have an image that's full width until a max width layout, like, sorry, full width until a max width, and then it's sort of there'd be a max width like you'd normally have with a layout where there's a max width. So the image would be full width until that max width breakpoint, and then it's going to stay fixed width.
Got it. Thanks.
That's a pretty common scenario too. Okay, so Anne is asking how media players handled. Yeah, media players have a whole different way of making them responsive. So this is just going to apply to images that are generated using Drupal's image styles. Yeah. And usually what you would do is find some CSS to copy and paste that does weird things with padding to make fixed size items respond properly.
I'm I'm intrigued by Ralph's question about the linter.
Mm-hmm.
And I guess my question for Ralph is, I mean, all of this stuff is stored in config. So how does the linter work on that, or does it?
The linter, it's like I've used this before. And this is I might even have this installed. This is bookmarklet, isn't it? Yeah. Yeah, I have it right there. Okay. Let's see what it thinks about Drupal's output here. No, that's the wrong one. We don't want that one. So here's the bookmarklet running.
Oh, I see. That's really cool.
Okay. So this says, oh, okay, the logo's fine. This says the sizes attribute has to match the width of the image. The size of the image doesn't match the sizes attribute. Add a viewport of 1280 by 720. The image was 579. Okay, so I've actually configured this wrong. Oh, okay. I don't really think this is a big deal. Okay, so it says that at the viewport of 1280 by 720, the image was 579 pixels wide instead of the specified 640, a 10% difference. So it's suggesting a more complicated calc value here. So this is saying at min width, it's actually not 50% width, it's 50% minus 49 pixels instead. It's a bit finicky, I'd say, but I mean, you can tell if it's really not working right or not.
That's pretty cool.
And it's thinking that browsers might get confused about this because it's not close enough.
I'm just curious how many folks are using the responsive image module, or has everybody been working with it, or? I know we've been using the Image Widget Crop and the Breakpoints module more this last year, I think.
It's pretty hard to configure this right, and it takes a bit of work to really understand the right scenario that you're targeting. So I think it was really helpful for me to learn this and figure out what is actually how I should actually be setting it up.
Yeah. Yeah, and thanks for that. I was going to say, I'm kind of like at that level where we use it, but I never have kind of like time to or patience to go in and understand in depth what actually is happening. Well, in theory, it kind of like I understand for the most part, but again, all the details and calculations that go into just kind of like it seems a bit overwhelming at times. But anyway, my question was actually, did you find any easy way to see what image the browser is actually picking up at certain breakpoint? I only found like in Chrome, you would have to go to like a network tab, reload the page, and actually look at what it picked. I don't know if there's any faster way in Firefox or any other different way to say what was actually being picked.
No, and
No.
that's really annoying.
Yeah.
Because you're looking at this thing, is it picking the right thing? I can tell by the cropping here that it does. And like using the art direction and the sources, I can tell that when I resize it smaller, yeah, it's using the right one. But especially so on the homepage, we have this huge banner image further down, and this was the hero one that I was showing before. So that one, I've got my two source sets here. Which one is it using? It's really hard to tell.
If you either move it to the bottom or you go up to those double right chevrons. Yeah, and choose network.
Yeah, that's what I've been doing. On Chrome,
Yeah.
same thing. You have to
And narrow it down to just images. And if you know the name of the image, that helps a lot because then you can
Oh,
put
yeah.
that filter and then you're only seeing that image. And then turn off caching. You already have that disabled, it looks like.
Yeah.
And then, yeah, that's how I do it. And in fact, even dragging between screens, if I go from my non-retina display to my retina display, I can see it load the retina version when I move it from one display to another.
Right.
Another option, which is a bit cumbersome, might be you could manually mark the images to see visually when you resize the browser if it's switching correctly and which image is actually used at which viewport. It's a bit. Afterwards, you can delete the images and regenerate them, so everything is gone. But for building an image style, the responsive image styles and those sets, it's helpful.
Yeah, I think that would even just be educational to do, just to see exactly where it's switching.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Especially on the picture element, it's predictable how the browser should behave. On the image source set side, not. It's a bit more open-ended.
One other quick question I had is, which admin theme are you using on this? Or is it...
This is called Mediterranean.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, I just came across it and I actually really liked that one. So I decided to go with it when we first started developing this project back in the spring.
Cool.
I'm curious, Megan, if do you ever get kind of pushback from clients on the image widget crop? Like the first time we started to configure it for a project, the nature of the designs and such were such that we had like a really long list of types. And so, every time they would add that media item, they would have to like go into like dozens of tabs. And so we realized that we had a problem. And actually we went back to the designer and we were able to like simplify and make that a shorter list. But I'm always wondering how content editors react to that.
Yeah, and this is actually when I first presented this to our Waterloo Doug, one of our attendees was really kind of appalled that I didn't go back to the designer and try and request a change. But like in this case, I think it's really necessary, and it's used pretty moderately in two different places in these big hero images in the half-width banner that we showed before, and that's it. So I definitely think that, yeah, if it was getting to be a lot of scenarios where you have to figure out, well, in this particular design, it's going to be sitting on top this way and things like that. Like, I think the stuff sitting on top of the content is probably more of a concern to me. And I can imagine like going back to the design in future and realizing like this sitting on top is going to be a problem. And yeah, one of the things that happened to me probably about almost 10 years ago now is that we had this design done and it had this great, it was like really in the early days of big hero images, but it had this big, huge drop down menu, like big mega menu, and people were so worried about what the image looks like with the mega menu open. Like it became such a huge problem. Thank you, Karen. Thank you for coming. Like this mega menu being open on top of the image just became like this humongous problem, and it was so hard to pick an image that would fit the space. There wasn't even that much other stuff on top of it. It was just, where does this mega menu lie? And this was even before responsive too. So yeah, it's definitely a challenge when you have a lot of different configuration and a lot of different stuff on top of images, which I actually think is probably the bigger problem.
I'm going to go ahead and stop recording, you guys, but we can stay on here and talk, okay?
Sure.
Stop.